David. So let's, okay. Thank you, David, and Sabiha for having me on again. Always great to be with Sutton Group for these webinars. And thanks for all the feedback I get from the agents too on these things. It's important so we can present other topical things and know that we're on track and answering your questions. So I appreciate all that. So today we're going to focus on representing the seller. And a lot of this is very basic information. I hope for most of you, it's a reminder as opposed to you're learning something brand new, but we're never too old or too experienced to be reminded of things and why we do things and how we do things and what's the process when we're on the seller side and how we work together acting for our mutual client, both the lawyer and the agent acting for a seller. So that's sort of the focus of today's topic. So I'm going to skip through our introductory slides other than I will pause when I get to this one because we have to talk about David and David on real estate. And I don't remember what we just recorded, David. What number was that we just did?
I think we did 135. It's kind of surreal, but David Korman and
Yeah.
we have a lot of fun recording these. And they're just filled with so much information, so much great advice. Whoever tunes in, thank you guys for tuning in and continue sending us feedback. We want to hear from you guys. We want to know what you think. And great. Just can't say enough how much I enjoy doing these with you, David.
Well, thank you. And we've had some amazing guests during these episodes, but the last couple that we just recorded was just me and you, David, and I think we had fun doing that. We had some interesting things to talk about, but sometimes it's just fun when it's just the two of us going back and forth and getting each other's viewpoints and challenging each other from our different viewpoints on a topic. And so if nobody ever watches it, we learn something from it every single time. And anyways, but check it out. Some good topics, some good things. So anywhere you listen to a podcast or check out, you can pick it up on YouTube. You can go to the Korman's YouTube channel. You'll get everything there. Pick and choose what episodes you want to take a look at. So let's talk about how we deal with things when we're on the seller side. Well, the number one thing that I should mention, and it should go without saying, but it's so critical, is make sure that the agreement of purchase and sale is completed correctly, doesn't have errors in it, and make sure that you review it in detail with your seller before they sign it. Okay. And I'm telling you that because first of all, you have an obligation under trust and RICO to do that more so than even before. But it's so critical. Like we forget sometimes because you and I are in the trenches. We're doing transactions all the time. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves that our clients don't have our experience. They don't know what the hell we're talking about when we're referring to certain things. And a lot of agents are focusing on the schedules to the agreement of purchase and sale because that's where you've inserted certain conditions, certain reps and warranties. So most agents will spend some time explaining those to the clients because it's part of a schedule. But don't forget about the pre-printed form and what the content is of that, because there's a lot of things in there that you should be giving some explanation to your seller client before they sign it. And when issues come up in your negotiations with the agreement, it's always critical for you to be able to get the lawyer involved that's going to be acting for the seller involved at the earliest opportunity. And obviously, I want all of you to use my firm for every single transaction that you do, because why wouldn't you? But I'm realistic, and that's not always possible in spite of efforts. Sometimes your clients have other lawyers that they've dealt with or family, friends, or whatever it is, and that's fine. But make sure that whatever lawyer is being involved, that it's important for you to have a relationship with the lawyer, and make sure that the seller has a relationship with the lawyer, so you're comfortable contacting them when you're in the throes of the negotiation and you're not sure what to do. And there might be some questions that come up. You're not sure how to interpret a clause. You're not sure how to what the ramifications are if something is crossed out, or whether you can cross something out. So you should always be comfortable to have that ability to do it. Now, you're lucky in your brokerage because before you even get to the lawyer, you've got resources there to contact. You've got David Gorski to help you out. You've got Sabiha that to help you out. You've got some experienced realtors who are very open and willing to share their knowledge. So you're better than a lot of people in other brokerages for having those resources available to you too. But please consider me and my team a place to look to as well. And don't wait till you're in trouble and that you got an unconditional agreement and you're going, uh-oh, how do I get out of it? Can I change it? What do I do? Way better to be proactive and deal with stuff beforehand. So now, how do you help out? How can you help the process along and make sure things are moving towards a timely closing once the agreement is signed? Part of your role is to make sure you're gathering certain information that we need. We need the seller's lawyer's name, contact information. We need the buyer's lawyer's name and contact information. We need that exchanged between the parties. So do it directly or do it through your admin office because they're always going to, they get that information, they send it on to us, which is great. I can tell you for most of you that I do work for, that our office does work for, I get it twice. I get all the information twice. So I usually get it first by the agents themselves saying, hey, we just got this deal signed. Client wants you to look after it. Here's the agreement. Here's the schedules. Here's everything you need. Here's the contact information for the other lawyer. And then I'll get it a second time when it gets processed through your admin department. So I'd rather get it twice than get it once and get it late. So the earliest I get it, the better from my point of view, because we need that information right away. So I'm acting for the seller. I want to get in touch with the buyer's lawyer the very first opportunity saying, hey, we're acting for the seller. We understand you're acting for the buyer. Here's my contact information. Send your requisitions. If there's anything you find on title, we want to know as early as possible so we can deal with any issues that come up and make sure we can close on time. So the earlier, the better. So we need you to help us out in the contact information gathering and exchange process. Okay. Now, most of the times when we're on the seller side, there's at least one mortgage that has to be discharged from title. Sometimes there's a line of credit. Sometimes there's more than that. We're going to need information for the mortgage lender's names and reference or loan numbers because we're going to be sending out letters to them requesting they send mortgage discharge statements as of the closing date. So that applies for any mortgages that are registered in title, applies to lines of credit as well, secured lines of credit. So we need that information. So you can help the seller get that information together and get it over to us so we can get our requests out in a timely fashion for that. Now, like I mentioned before, you want to please make sure that the lawyer acting for the seller gets a copy of the agreement of purchase and sale. And by the agreement, we need everything. We need all the schedules. We need the amendments. We need the waivers, notices of fulfillment. We need the whole package. So I don't care how many emails it comes in, but one way or the other, we need everything. Okay. Because when we get it, the first thing we're doing is we're going through it. We're reading it all. We're looking at, here's the original agreement. We're looking through it, reading through the schedules, reading through everything. Were there any amendments? Let's read the amendments, see how that changes, how we're going to set up the information in our system. Has everything been waived? If there was any conditions, were there notice of fulfillment done? Is there what did the amendments say? Was the purchase price changed? Was the deposit amount changed? Is there a list of deficiencies that they've now agreed to fix up? Or is there an abatement of the purchase price? It's an amendment. We're looking for all that type of thing right away when we set up our file. So we've got that information there. So send the whole package to us, okay? And the earlier you get it to us, the better. Now we're selling a property that that we may not have acted on at the time it was purchased. So we don't have information about the legal description or if there's a survey or things like that. So if there's a deed that the seller has, If there's a survey the seller has, send it on to the lawyer. It's important for us to have that as well, so we make sure we've got the right legal description in the preparation of our documents as well. Now, we're going to be doing an adjustment on closing for property taxes. So we're going to need information on the property taxes and one way that you can really help out the seller is in most municipalities have property taxes paid by a pre-authorized payment system these days. Sometimes there's still post-dated checks that are provided. People have options sometimes, but find out, how's your seller paying their property taxes? If there is a pre-authorized payment plan, then help the seller out to make sure it's canceled effective as the closing date. But whatever has been paid up to the closing date, or whatever is supposed to be paid in terms of property taxes up to the closing date, should be paid by the seller. Okay, even if it was closing July 4th and there was a payment due on July 3rd, the seller should make that July 3rd payment, send the lawyer confirmation they made the July 3rd payment, and we will be adjusting for that with the buyer. So if the seller has overpaid for their share of the property taxes for the year, we will be adjusting with the buyer to get a credit back as part of the closing process. That's the way the system works best. We don't want the seller to not pay the July 3rd because now there's going to be interest and penalties that'll be accruing because it's going to be paid late. And then we get into a battle of who's supposed to pay for the interest and penalties. And it's usually going to be the seller's fault because if it was due on July 3rd, they should pay it on July 3rd. And don't worry about paying it. We'll get the money back from the buyer as part of the closing process. So you should be helping to explain that to the seller, and we're explaining that to the seller anyways. That our law clerk will go through that with them. The lawyer will be discussing that with them when we go through all the statement of adjustments. And I'm going to give you some an example of a statement of adjustments and how the flow of funds works in a few minutes when we go through that. So we'll come back to that as well. Now, if the property being sold happens to be a condominium, we've got to make sure that the common expenses were paid for July 1st. If we're closing on July 4th, they should still pay, same principle. You pay the July 1st common expenses, and then we will adjust back and collect back from the buyer for July, because the seller will only be responsible for the first 3 days of July, but they paid for the full month of July, but we'll get a credit back for the seller as part of our statement of adjustments. But again, the same principle. If it's due July 1st, pay it on July 1st, even though the closing is just a couple days later, it still should be paid. The other place you can, again, get some brownie points with your client is help them cancel any pre-authorized payment for their monthly common expenses. Or if they've provided post-dated checks to the management office, help them get the balance of their checks back, starting with the August check. So you either want to get return of any post-dated checks, or you want to get confirmation from the management office that they've destroyed the checks and they won't be processing them. So help your client out with doing those things, and you'll be adding some value and doing a big service to them as well. Now, you can also help the seller with contacting the various utility companies to make sure that final meters are read on the day of closing, and that the final billings are sent to the right billing address, so that we want to make sure the seller gets it. And in those, because it's not going to be to the address of the property that they just sold, it's to wherever they're going. So we want to make sure that there's accurate information provided to the utility companies as to where to send the final bill for the seller, because nobody likes receiving a bill down the road where there's penalties and interest that accrued because there was some confusion or mix-up about where the final billing should be sent. So if that happens, you know what's going to happen. They're not going to blame themselves. The seller's going to blame anybody else they could find, and you're going to be in the firing line, and the lawyer is going to be in the firing line. They're going to look for somebody to blame. So we're reminding the clients about this all the time. We're going to send them a letter as soon as we open our file that's going to tell them to do this. We're going to remind them again during the process. We're going to tell them again when we meet with them to sign the documents. But even if we do all that and it doesn't happen, and they get a bill with interest and penalties, they're going to blame us or they're going to blame you, but it's never their fault. So the more we can help them out with this, the better. Okay. It's amazing. Like we send out these introductory letters when we open our files to clients. It's 3-4 pages long, gives them great information about the process, things they should do, things that we should do. And it's amazing how people don't read these things. So it serves value to us as lawyers when something does come back later and something happens, and then we say to them, like, we sent you a letter, that outlines all this. You have to follow the letter, but they don't sometimes read it. So it's good that for you to understand the process. We remind them about the process when we meet with them to close and sign documents. Sometimes it's not enough. So they got to be told 5 times. Again, it goes back to the point that I made earlier. We do this all the time. We understand what we're talking about when we do send out a letter or we explain it to them. You do this all the time. They don't. Okay. They do it a handful of times in their whole lifetime. And it might be 5-10 years apart, could be longer. And the systems change, and the way they do things changes, and the way you tell a utility company to forward the final bill to another address is different today than it was a few years ago. So any assistance that you can provide, we can provide, is a positive thing to do. Okay. Same thing with home insurance. Okay. They have to cancel their home insurance, their content liability insurance. If it's a condo, it won't be fire insurance. But if it's another property, non-condo, it's all their fire and home insurance, and they should cancel it. But make sure they don't cancel it until after we close. Okay, because if they can't cancel the day of closing, what if the buyer can't close that day? Can't close. They're supposed to close today, July 4th, and they can't close until next Monday. We might agree to an extension. We don't want the property to be uninsured until the closing. So you got to make sure that they cancel it as soon as we finish the closing process, and now it becomes the buyer's property. That's when the cancellation should go through, but they should be giving a heads up to their insurance company. They're going to be canceling it, and they'll let them know exactly once the transaction closes so that it can be canceled. And they probably be entitled to some money back on their policy. So help them out with that as well. There oftentimes is some non-utility type of accounts that you can assist with them, getting them canceled as well. And sometimes they're on pre-authorized payments and things like that for items like cable, internet, phone, things like that. Some people still have home phones and things like that. Make sure those things get canceled. Okay, now the most important thing that you're going to want to do from your point of view is make sure that the seller's lawyer receives the commission statement. You guys have to get paid. You worked hard. You're entitled to get paid the balance of your commission. So make sure that you check the commission statement. You've got a great admin department there. We don't often find any errors or mistakes, but sometimes there was something that was changed in the commission structure, either at your end or the buyer's end or whatever. And commission statements do change sometimes. Sometimes it happens as part of a negotiation over certain items that go wrong. Check the commission statement that's being sent out. Make sure it's accurate, number one. Number two is make sure that the seller's lawyers receive the commission statement, and at an earliest time as possible as well, because we are going to be directing money to pay any balance of commissions owed. So we want to make sure we've got that lined up and we've got the commission statement in hand so we can calculate all the numbers and make sure that you guys get paid as soon as possible after closing without delay. So that's important as well. Then it's really important, and it's something David and I talk about a lot when we do our podcast, is we're always trying to manage expectations, manage our clients. It's really important from your end as a seller's agent. It's important from my end as a seller's lawyer to manage our clients so they know what to expect. They're not kept in the dark. They know what's coming. So you can be telling your seller client to expect that they're going to meet with their lawyer, usually about 2 or 3 days before closing, to sign all the documents, deliver keys, fobs, access cards if they're being delivered. And we don't get delivery of them very often to us. More often than not, things are dealt with these days by leaving them on site in a lockbox. But in the old days, those veterans out there will remember that most of the time the keys were delivered to the seller's lawyer, and then we would deliver them to the buyer's lawyer. It doesn't happen very often, but it still happens once in a while now. So usually we're not going to meet till 2 or 3 days before closing. So we want the clients to know that. So they're not expecting to meet 2 weeks before closing, or 10 days, or even a week sometimes before closing. And the reason we're not doing it until closer to the closing time is because when we do meet with them to sign, we want to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row. We want to make sure we were able to do all the financial calculations so we can tell them, this is how much we're getting on closing, this is where the money's going, and this is how much you're going to be receiving at the end of the day. So we can't do that until we receive all the information. And usually the information that we're waiting for in order to do those calculations is the mortgage discharge statements and any secured line of credit discharge statements. So we know how much has to be paid out for that. Hopefully we already have the property tax information and the amount of common expenses to adjust. But usually the delay in putting our numbers together is waiting for the mortgage discharge statements. We hope we also have the commission statement, because we can't do all our calculations without having that piece of the puzzle as well. So then we're going to be putting together our statement of adjustments, and I'll show you what a statement of adjustments looks like in a second. So the importance of doing a statement of adjustments is determine what the balance due that we're going to get from the buyer to the seller on the closing, which is basically a simple math calculation, simple when you've done it a couple thousand times, of the purchase price less the deposit amount, and then there might be credits or one where the buyer, the seller, for certain adjustments, which are basically property taxes. And if it's a condominium, it'll be an adjustment for common expenses. So that's how we determine what the balance due on closing is to the seller. Purchase price minus the deposit, plus or minus whatever the adjustments are, gives us a number, which will be the balance due on closing to the seller. Okay. Now, from that balance due on closing, we're going to pay out certain things. We're going to pay the legal fees and disbursements. We're going to pay out the mortgages, any lines of credit, and we're going to pay any balance of commissions owed to the agents. Okay. So that's the mathematical process that we're going to go through, and I'll show you the adjustments in a second. And I can always want to encourage you, like, it's great if you haven't closed a transaction on your own for your own personal stuff in a long time, consider coming to the seller's meeting with the lawyer to sign documents and go through all this and see how we do it. And I'll tell you, we do it differently now because we do it electronically and through video conference, through an amazing system that we have. So we're not doing it in person very often anymore, but it's still worth doing. And as long as you get permission from your seller, you can attend and be added as a party to the video conference and see how this thing all works. So I encourage you to do it if you haven't done one, to see how we do it, number one. Number two, if your seller might need some hand-holding, for example, if English isn't their first language and you can help and act as an interpreter, help explain things to them, then by all means, it'd be great to have you involved in the video conference, and we can add you as long as the seller's okay with it, because there's privacy issues. But if the seller's fine with you attending, then no problem. You attend. So I think you'd find it interesting. So I promised I'd give you a little look at what a statement of adjustments looks like. And it's not a complicated document. It's basically, would look something like this. There'd be details filled in for who the vendor is, who the purchaser is, the property description, the date that's being adjusted of. Let's say it's being adjusted as of, whatever the date is, the date will be there. And there's two columns. One is a credit column to the vendor. One's a credit call to the purchaser. And the vendor or the seller will get credit with the sale price, whatever that one is. In this example, it was, I don't know if you can read this well, but it was $462,000. And then there'll be a credit to the buyer for the deposit they made, and this was $15,000. So then we're going to have two adjustments here, because this happens to be a condo. There'll be an adjustment for common expenses. So we're going to calculate, we're going to set out what the monthly common expenses are. And this one looks like it closed probably on January 15th, 2020. So there was a 14-day adjustment because the common expenses would have been paid by the seller for the month of January, but the seller only owned the property for 14 days. So we calculate the seller's share for those 14 days, and the seller will get a credit for the difference. There's a $462 credit to the seller because they paid for the full month of January. Okay, and then there'll be an adjustment for property taxes. In this case, it was because it was January of 2020. The taxes wouldn't have been determined yet for 2020, so it'd be based on the prior year's taxes. So we put in what the 2019 taxes were, and we estimated there'll be a 3% increase. Okay, now regardless of whatever the year is, there's always some sort of estimated increase. It's usually in the range of 3 to 5% because that's generally what the taxes have been going up. And we'll get an indication usually from the municipality that it might be, 4% this year, might be 5%. We're going to, estimate on the high side. So to estimate what the taxes are. And then because it was early in the year, the seller wouldn't have paid anything towards those taxes because it was January, but they own the property for 14 days. So we're giving the buyer a credit for those 14 days worth of property taxes. So, that's basically what an adjustment is. It's just to make sure that everybody is paying their fair share. And at the end of all these adjustments, we get to a balance due on closing, which is the amount that the buyer has to pay the seller on the day of closing. So in this case, it was this $447,388 number that you see on the bottom, the balance due on closing. So that'll lead us to our trust ledger statements, because now we want to figure out what's going to happen with the flow of funds. So a trust ledger would look something like this. So on the right-hand side, we've got the amount that we're going to be receiving from the purchaser on closing, which is that $447,388 number. That was the balance due on closing from the statement of adjustments. So that's how much we're going to get into our trust account. Now, from that, we have to pay out certain things. We're going to pay out the balance of commission owed to the real estate broker, which was $3,200 and change. We're going to pay the legal fees. Sorry, we're going to pay the amount we have to pay to discharge the mortgage. There was $157,000 had to be paid to discharge the first mortgage. There was $1,200 in legal fees and disbursements that had to be paid to Korman's. And after everything is paid, the balance that's left for the seller is $285,378.76. So that's the number that the seller wants to see and wants to go over to make sure that you see that everything is paid, nothing is owed, commissions are paid, legal fees are paid, mortgage is paid to discharge the mortgage. At the end of the day, they're going to get $285,000 deposited to their account. Okay, now in the old days, they'd be picking up a check, certified check or bank draft from our office. That doesn't happen very often. It's usually we're getting account information from the seller, and we'll deposit that money directly to their account, either by direct deposit or by wire transfer. And we'll go through that with them to find out their preferences and get all the information to understand. And we want you to understand and help them manage that so they know when they're going to get their money. So if we close early enough in the day, they'll get the money the same day. That $285,000 will show up in their bank account that day. We'll send them an email with confirmation that we closed, and they should look for that amount to come into their account and check it. If we end up closing late in the afternoon, they may not get that money until the following day. It might not show up until the following day. So same thing, we want to manage their expectations. We don't want them freaking out that it's 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. They don't see the money in their account because it may not get there till the next day if we close late in the afternoon. So we're going to be letting the seller know that they may not get it that day. They might get it first thing the following morning. Again, when we're managing their expectations in advance, we're not going to have a problem with them. They're not going to be freaking out. So you should understand the process as well, because none of us like clients that are freaking out on us. Okay, so that's basically where the flow of funds works and everything. So point 13 here was to advise the seller to pick up funds from the seller's lawyer's office or get confirmation that the funds have been deposited. Expect it between 2 and 5 o'clock. Okay, so that's what I was just talking about. It's not that often they're picking up funds. It used to be the common way, and a great way for a seller's agent to add value in the process was to attend at our office and pick up that check. We still have that happening from time to time by some agents picking it up for the seller to take it to them because the seller's busy. They're moving their stuff. They're busy with a bunch of other things, moving their life and all their belongings. So sometimes you can add value that way to actually pick up funds if they have to, or just to help them to make sure that they're checking and they're getting their funds. Now, again, we're managing expectations. Most transactions close between 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock. Occasionally, we'll get some transactions closed in the morning, especially a cash transaction. If a buyer is paying cash and not waiting for a mortgage, then usually there's no reason why we can't close earlier in the day, between 10 and 12 in the morning oftentimes. But again, it's not something that's completely within our control, because even if it's a cash transaction, if the buyer's lawyer's not available to close in the morning and can't close until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then we can't do anything about that. They have to close that day, but we can't control exactly what time that they will close. So again, we want to make sure sellers understand this. We're managing expectations. But in the normal course, most transactions will close sometime between 2 and 5. And if we get it done during that time window, we're usually able to get funds transferred to the seller. If it's 5 o'clock or after, when we get confirmation, sometimes it'll carry on to the next day. So we want to manage expectations. Okay, and then again, we need you to help in the process of reminding the seller to contact the utility companies to make sure the meters were read. Final accounts are being sent to the right place. We don't want them being charged interest or penalties. And there's adjustments that we went through for common expenses, for property taxes, same principle for meter reading. The day of closing, the consumption of utilities belongs to the buyer. Okay. The property taxes on the day of closing belong to the buyer. Common expenses on the day of closing belong to the buyer. Okay, so that's the way adjustments should be. Okay, now we always want to be careful they don't cancel utilities too soon, because sometimes, even though we're supposed to close on July 4th, transactions these days do get extended. We don't want you to property to go without utilities for a week, because that could cause some serious problems to a property. So we got to be careful with that as well. So your involvement, your assistance with them to making sure that these things get done in a timely fashion is really important. Okay. Now, another point I always want to make, if it is a condominium that's being sold, there's a limited period of time that a seller can use the elevator to move out. Same thing when you're buying a condominium, there's a limited period of time when you can book the elevator to move in. So help them with that as well. Make sure they're getting it moved, they're getting it booked, because different buildings have different rules about that. Most buildings, especially high-rise buildings, sometimes only have one dedicated elevator, the padded elevator that can be used to move things in and out. They get really busy. So make sure they're on top of it and getting things moved out in a timely fashion. And they've got to get their stuff out of the place on the day of closing. Okay. So make sure the elevator is booked. Okay. We don't want to be a situation where they closed and now they can't move their stuff out and the buyer can't move in because the seller hasn't completely moved out. So make sure that gets done as well. This is point 16 here on this slide is something that I made a reference to earlier, to consider attending with the seller, with the seller's lawyer. And we've always been open to that. I think it's a great thing to do, whether it's an in-person meeting, which we don't do very often, and we do that by exception. And even when we do in-person meetings, just so you know, if we do an in-person signing, they'll be meeting in our boardroom in one of our 3 offices, wherever it's convenient. We will give them a tablet, and we're still going to do an electronic sign up, but we will help them do it in our office. We're not printing out documents anymore in our office and signing in wet ink and then uploading them back into a computer and everything. We do it still by an electronic process. It's the most secure way. It's recorded. It's safest way. It allows for the instant transfer of information and providing the documents right away. It's a fabulous system. So even on the rare occasion when we have someone that's not technically gifted, let's say, and wants to come into the office to do it, we're still going to be doing it that way. Now, if someone is doing an electronic closing, signing up electronically, another great way that you can add value, especially if someone is challenged technically, is to be with them when they do it. As long as they give you permission to do it, just because of the privacy issues, that's a great way to do it. Maybe it's an elderly person who doesn't have an iPhone or doesn't have a tablet or an iPad or isn't comfortable doing it. It's a real simple process. If I could do it, anybody could do it. But there's certain people that have limitations or they may not have the right equipment. But if you attend with them, you can do it from your computer, your tablet, your iPhone, etc., and help them through the process. So it's a great way you can literally hold their hand and help them through a sign-up process and add value. Okay. Now, last point I really want to make on this, when you're selling, it's always important for us, and I'm talking about us, you as the agent, me as the lawyer, we have to determine if the seller is a non-resident of Canada. Sometimes it's an easier answer, sometimes it's a complicated answer. A non-resident for the purpose of Section 116 of the Income Tax Act is an important consideration. Now, that's got nothing to do with citizenship or Canadian a citizen. You can be a Canadian citizen. You can be born in Canada, raised in Canada, always been a Canadian citizen, not live in any other country other than visits. But you might at some point be considered a non-resident of Canada for the purposes of the sale of this particular property. If you've spent, and this applies to snowbirds and things like that, or people that travel a lot, if in the year leading up to the closing date, they spent more days out of the country than they were in the country during that year leading up to the closing date. So we have to just figure out all their trips and when they've been away and add up all the number of days, sometimes to determine whether they would be considered a non-resident of Canada for the purposes of this transaction. And why is that important? If someone is considered a non-resident of Canada for the purpose of the sale transaction, then there's a holdback obligation on closing. The seller's lawyer will be holding back either 25% of the sale price or 50% of the sale price in trust until a certificate is obtained from the CRA that confirms that all taxes have been paid, that the seller owes no taxes, or provides a specific amount that has to be paid to the CRA from the holdback funds. So if it's a non-resident person, we've got to go through a process. We need an accountant involved. We need you to help get an accountant involved, get the information that the accountant needs to get the application into the CRA so we can get a certificate as soon as possible to confirm that there's no money owed, or if there is money owed, how much it is, so that can be paid out to the CRA so that the seller can get the balance of the funds. So it's really important. And sometimes sellers don't know whether they'll be considered non-residents of Canada or not for these purposes. So you have to have an understanding of this. It should be part of the conversation that you have as soon as you agree to take on a listing for a seller. It should be one of the things that you start asking them right away, because if they might be a non-resident, first of all, we need to make that determination and get the lawyer involved, get the accountant involved. And if they are a non-resident or will be a non-resident at the time of closing, then we want to get in motion the application for the certificate of compliance that we're going to need from the CRA. So we don't have the closing proceeds tied up in a trust account. So it's a real important issue, and you guys should be focused on it and asking every single seller and explaining it to them, because you just never know if a seller becomes a non-resident, and it might be they travel all the time, and you can do a calculation last 5 years and they never would have been considered non-resident, but this particular year they took a couple extra trips, and all of a sudden you add up the days that they're out of the country, and they became a non-resident this year, and subject to this section 116 of the Income Tax Act. So with that, I'm going to throw it back to David and Sabiha. In case any of you have any questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer them, or you can always contact me privately if you have any questions on this or anything else. You guys know how to get a hold of me, and best way, I should just tell you, because I do get busy from time to time, best way to contact me is to send me an email. Even if you want to have a phone conversation with me, usually the first contact, easier to send me an email than to leave me a voicemail or to just try and phone me, because I can multitask easier with emails. So I can be teaching a webinar like this and still answer some emails, although I didn't even look at my phone during this one. But sometimes I can do that, and then we can set up a time to talk if that's more appropriate. So start with an email, and then we'll see where it goes. So David, I'll throw it back to you.
Appreciate that. Lots of great tidbits, lots of great information. I made some notes. And whenever we go through a webinar with you, David, I always think about social media. I always think about creating content. I always think about being a thought leader. I always think about how I can use this information to, really provide value to our clients. And I think, David, you said it best when you said that we as professionals look at this information all the time. We read agreements of purchase and sale, we're in the transaction, but sometimes we lose track of the fact that most of our clients don't see these agreements every day. Most of our clients don't buy and sell a home every day, all the time, even though some of them might be veterans and might be repeat clients, might have come back to you 2 or 3 times. It's still relatively foreign to them. Right. So I made some notes. And whenever I hear a presentation like this, whenever I hear you speak, David, I'm always thinking about how can I use this information to be a thought leader and to present this information to my network, to my database, and how can I do that? What can I communicate? And the very easy things that I made a note of was, the whole canceling the pre-authorized payments when you're selling a condo. Like, what a great value added service for your clients, and let them know, hey, John, thank you so much. So glad we were able to sell your condo, get you an amazing price. Just so you know, I've already emailed property management, let them know that you've sold, given them the name of the new buyer, and told them that they should expect to hear from the new buyer. And you know what? Even as a courtesy, I'm going to remind you to book an elevator, because sometimes, you have a moving date set in stone. There's only 3 appointments for the moving elevator on that day. Guess what? If somebody bought a new couch, if if the building is doing some renovations, if somebody else is moving in, these are situations that happen all the time in big buildings. And you don't book that elevator, now your seller is coming back and now they're saying, oh my God, David, elevator is not available. Can we extend the closing? Can we close on a different day? What can we do? Making other arrangements. And it just takes away from that buying experience of your client. So, go that extra mile, provide that value added service, and make social media posts about this and say, look, when you buy or sell with me, when you sell a condo with me, these are the services I'm going to do. I'm going to contact your property manager. I'm going to make sure that we cancel your pre-authorized checks. I'm going to help you book an elevator. I'm going to go the extra mile to make this process smooth and easy for you. That's why you should work with me. That's why you should work with Sutton Realty.
Yeah, and I deal with a lot of real estate agents. So I see the spectrum from the best to the worst. And I can tell you something that all of the best agents have in common. They don't abandon their clients as soon as they sign an agreement of purchase and sale and the conditions are waived. They don't abandon the transaction. Their focus isn't, okay, I'm done. When do I get my commission check? Like, they stay very much a part of the process and help them right through it. And they'll get the commission check, but not only do they get that, but those are the guys that get the guys and the girls, excuse me, they're the agents that get the referrals that people are so happy to tell their friends and family and coworkers and everybody else about what a great agent they got because they did, they went that extra mile. I don't know if any of you ever watched the movie Jerry Maguire.
Yeah.
It was on last night. I hadn't seen it in years. It was an old Tom Cruise movie. He's a sports agent, and it's all about him just going that extra mile for his client. And there's a great scene at the end when his one client that he had, just had an incredible day. So he's going to get this big contract, football contract offered to him because he had this great day. And he's so emotional. He's hugging his agent outside the dressing room. And one of the star players in another team is standing beside his agent. And he says to him, how come we don't have that relationship? And the agent sort of turns to him and tries to hug him, and he goes, like, get away from me. Like, you can't give me a fake relationship. Like you're either in all the way or you're not. And I think clients really feel that. And the same thing from their lawyer too. Unfortunately, I always, Dave and I talked about this in our podcast too. I never get the chance to know the clients anywhere near as much as you guys do. We don't. We have communication when the agreement first comes in. We have, we meet with clients to sign documents and have that, but we don't have all the opportunities that you guys do to build up the relationship. And it's something that's lacking in my business. I have more opportunity to build a relationship with you guys, with the agents, with David, Sabiha, all the agents in your office, because we have transactions together. We have, we can attend social events together, but it's hard for me as a lawyer to have that kind of relationship with the actual clients. I do that more on commercial transactions. I have commercial clients are back, often, many, many times in the same year. It's different with people who are buying homes because it could be, we can have a great relationship with people. I don't see them for 5, 10 years. It's different. But you guys have that opportunity, and that's how you guys can earn your referrals by going the extra mile. Don't abandon them just because you got a condition. The conditions are all waived and you got a firm deal. Okay, there's a lot to do before you wait for your commission check.
Yeah, and being with your clients at the time of signing with the lawyer, what a great value added service just to be able to, and I know you guys do a really great job, but the agents have the relationship. So, why not hold their hand to that process? Be there if they have any questions. If they want to dive a little bit deeper on any topic, you can actually assist them through that. And it's all about, continuing to be there and building that relationship. So important. And for the NRST, David, we're seeing more and more Canadians retire, move abroad, sell their house here in Canada. It's not something that, I support personally, but there is an opportunity to be a bit of a thought leader and to create some videos and say, hey, if you're thinking about, moving abroad or selling your house, or if you're thinking about retiring outside of Canada, then I'm your go-to professional, and we handle these type of transactions all the time. We can assist you with your CRA tax certificate. We'll arrange it for you. We'll help you through it. We'll make sure that your funds are released, they're not held in trust, and all of a sudden people are going to reach out to you because you're putting out information and you're helping them through that process. Right. So take what David Korman, teaches, take all the information that the brokerage provides you with, and look how you can turn those into opportunities to, do more business and really be a thought leader in your community.
Can I ask a question, please, or make a comment?
Of course, Nader, please.
Yeah, David Korman, I had recently a challenging client with your firm, which I'm pretty sure you're aware of it.
Yep.
After all the problem kind of got solved, I sent at least 5 emails requesting that I'll be in the signing sessions because of the challenges of my client. And never I heard back, and I was never added to the signing session. And that was a disappointment for me.
So did you send, sorry, Nader, did you send that to the associate lawyer involved, or was it to the law clerk?
to both, at least,
Yeah.
if not both, at least the lawyer involved.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's obviously very disappointing for me to hear because I'm always encouraging that, and there's no reason why you wouldn't have been included as long as your client was okay with it. And I know the transaction you're talking about, and it would have been great for you to be on there to help that client out with it. And that's the exact situation where we want an agent to be part of the signing. So so that's an issue. And I'll tell you, while we're on that, we just discussed this. We had our biweekly meetings yesterday, our management meeting, and then we have a staff meeting, we have a lawyers meeting, and we talked about in all the meetings about some things that that I wasn't happy about, and things went wrong. And without naming names in it, I was referring to that particular file, Nader, so because there was issues that shouldn't happen and generally don't happen in our firm. And one of the important things that came out of that was, and I encourage you all to take heart to this too. There was attempts to communicate through email, and the emails weren't going through and weren't being responded to. And at the end of the day, I emphasize to me, it's not good we send a third email, a fourth email, a fifth email. Yeah, we want them to do that, but if the emails are not being responded to, pick up the damn phone. And I wanted to, and I'm sorry for my tone, but that's how I explained it to my people yesterday. Like, pick up the phone, call the client, make sure you got the right phone number, make sure you got the right email, call the agent saying, I'm having trouble getting a hold of the client. I've sent 5 emails. They're not responding. Get the agent involved. And if we can't do it, we're living in a world where everybody is sort of more comfortable texting and emailing. And sometimes we have to pick up the phone and have a conversation, because that's the way to explain things. It's easier to explain things to people in a conversation than it is in a text or an email. Can you imagine if I tried to tell you everything I just told you in the last hour in an email or a text? Like, I couldn't, especially the way I type, like I'd be here forever. But in a conversation, you can understand things way better. So that's what I'm encouraging our staff to do, and the associate lawyers to do. That's how we built our law firm and our reputation of the firm, and that's what I'm insisting that they do that. And occasionally stuff happens and things fall through the cracks. We're not happy about it, and but we have to find the best way to communicate with the individual clients, and we need the participation of the agents, especially when we have a difficult client or a client where language is an issue, or just understanding is an issue, like for the reasons David went through. They don't know what we're doing. They don't understand the process. And even when we explain it to them, it goes right over their heads sometimes because they really don't understand it. We got to break it down and hold their hand right through it. And we need you to do that. So, Nader, I can tell you, I'm going to go back to the clerk and the associate that are involved in that particular file and talk to them about that, because that's a prime example of where you should have absolutely been included in the signing meeting and in the whole process.
Yeah, and
Would have gone way
David,
smoother.
what I was this is very unfortunate that happened like that. As you said, like I really appreciate your webinars, and you're trying to educate us as much as possible. You spend your valuable time, but since we give you, like, we basically recommend your firm to the client, and this happens, and we look horrible in front of clients. And as you said, the least I was expecting is a phone call saying, hey, we cannot get a hold of the client, do something. At least a phone call,
Right.
anyway.
And absolutely. And that's the point I was making to my staff, because it's not, I don't want at the end of the day to say, well, look, we had, our record, look at our file, David. We had all these attempts to get a hold of the client. We get a hold of the, I don't care. We're the day before closing, or 2 days before closing, and we don't have the client yet. So it doesn't matter that we there's, what else could we have done to get the client to respond? And one of the ways, what we could have done better job, we could have got in touch with the agent on the file, which was Nader. And if we couldn't get him by email because we had the incorrect email address, then we could have got him by phone, or we could have found the correct email address, or find out why we can't get a hold of the agent, because there's always a reason. So never stop. And sometimes the phone is the best way to deal with it. Okay, it's way easier to get a hold of people and get explanations that way. So we can't be a slave to texts and emails and think we've done our job properly. So believe me, we had this discussion internally because it's something that shouldn't have happened, and it's easily correctable, and we have to be aware of it. Okay. And inevitably things like this only happen when we're right at the end of June and the busiest time of the year with closing. So we have no time to pick up the phone, or less time to pick it up, but it doesn't matter. That's just an excuse. It doesn't help that particular client, that particular transaction. They don't care that we're busy because it's the end of June. They only have one transaction. So it's never an excuse at our end, and it shouldn't be. We got to be better. Okay. And we're always looking to find a way to be better and more efficient and more thorough.
Thank you, David.
And the one thing I will say as well is that I have a tremendous amount of respect for the way that Korman solves their issue, because it's not really the band-aid approach. And we, like, I teach my staff this all the time as well. When a problem's presented, I want to put in systems in place to make sure that that never happens again. Like, that's how I solve my issues as a business owner. When something's presented to me, of course I want to solve that particular issue, but I'm always looking at the bigger picture, saying, okay, why did this issue happen? What can we do? What systems can we put in place? What safety net can I put around so that we're not solving that same issue tomorrow? Because when that same issue tomorrow gets presented to me a second time, that's when I get upset. But I give David Korman's I give their firm a lot of credit, because I know that that's exactly how they approach issues as well. And it's a great way to kind of put that safety net around these issues. David, the other thing I wanted to say about that is, remember we had Teresa on our podcast. I can't remember what her last name is, but the one thing she said that really stood out to me is when it comes to communicating with people, ask how people want to be communicated with. Ask the person, listen,
Right.
How do you want to be communicated with? Right?
Yeah.
It's easier for realtors to do this because we have less clients than it is a law office. But some of your clients will say, listen, if you really need to get a hold of me, do A, B, and C. And I really don't like email, so don't ever email me. And as a professional and as somebody that wants to cultivate a relationship, it's your job to listen and to communicate on their level. And that really resonated with me, because we each have a communication means that we're more comfortable with. Like, I love emails too, but I love phone calls. I'm okay with text messaging too, but everybody has one communication mean that they're kind of skewed towards, but that's your communication mean. You have to communicate on your client's communication method, right? So ask them, hey, how do you want me to communicate with you? What's the easiest way? What works best? What do you not like? Like, what's your least favorite? And try to really be in tune with that, because that's gonna set you apart from all the other professionals that are miscommunicating with that client because they're not listening to them and not understanding, what they're really looking forward to.
Yeah, and we get that a lot of times in emails sent to us by agents when they're sending over a file, and we need the contact information from the clients. A lot of agents are putting that right in. Here's the email address, here's phone numbers, but this is the best way to communicate with them. This person happens to be a teacher. Their only email address is the one at their school, so you can't put any real information in there. You can send them an email just to ask them to call you or to contact you, but don't put any private information in those emails. But also, you're not going to get a call until, when they're on lunch hour or after 4 o'clock or something like that, because, they just, the type of work they're in, they can't communicate with you during those. So that information is really important. And I agree with David 100%. Like, you guys, that's a great question to be asking your clients. What's the best way to communicate with you? Are there any, better times of day? Is it better by email? Is it better by whatever? The same way that I explained to you, you want to get a hold of me, send me an email. Even if you want to talk to me, start with an email. It's the best way. I can answer that faster, and we can set up a time for a call, right? Everybody else has whatever works for them. Okay. Some people love getting voicemail messages. I hate getting voicemail messages. I can't understand most of the voicemail messages I get. And forget about people's accents. Just things get cut off in phone conversations. You get a best, so you get 9 numbers, you don't get the 10th number and a phone number to call back. So that's why I prefer email communication to start. And everybody has their preference. So ask that question. It's a great question to ask your clients.
Absolutely. Awesome. Pedro asked, what happens if the non-resident does not owe any CRA taxes? Then CRA will issue the certificate and their funds will be released without being held in trust.
Yeah. A lot of times, we get there's no taxes owing, but it's still a certificate issued with CRA saying there's 0 owing, or they'll put a specific amount in saying, what has to be paid. So once we have whatever the answer is, we comply with the certificate. If it's 0, no problem. We can release all the money.
Tony's asking, what if one of the condo fees or bills are in arrears and will not be able to pay ahead of time, but only on closing?
Well, yeah, we make those arrangements a lot of times too, because sometimes it can't be cleared. We need the closing proceeds to pay it. But we'll make arrangements, with the other lawyer, with the buyer's lawyer, that we're going to direct money from the sale, just the same way that we're directing money to discharge a mortgage, to pay out a mortgage. We're also paying outstanding property taxes, or we're paying outstanding common expenses, or something of that nature. So we will provide them that, we'll get confirmation. We'll work that out between the lawyers to confirm the amounts that are being paid and directed, and we'll provide an undertaking that we're going to do it. And after we do it, we'll let the other lawyer know that we did it, we paid it, and here's the confirmation, and we work that out. So that's not an uncommon thing. Sometimes we just have to make those arrangements because things can't be cleared off until we get the closing proceeds.
Okay, and I think Abu has his hand up. Abu, I know you've been patient for a really long time, so I want to give you the floor.
Yeah, David, can we please go up on the page where you showed the statement of adjustment? I had a question on that.
Okay, I don't know. I'd have
I
to.
think it's slide 12.
Yeah, I gotta see if I can share it again. Hang on. Okay, it should be coming up now. Slide 12.
Yep. I think that was having that table, the vendor adjustment.
Perfect.
Yeah.
This one, 11.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm curious here when you're calculating the taxes, the realty taxes.
Yeah.
So I have a specific example to give you. Say like you had I know this we are representing from the seller side. We're looking these things from the seller end, but say like you have something, a closing, which is in the month of June when the final tax bill has not been generated. All that you have is the interim tax bill.
Yeah.
And we have often seen that in interim tax bill, the bills are lower as opposed to the final tax bill, which shows some additional amount and all. I see that you have done this estimated 3% increase year over year and calculated the numbers that way. Now, what do you do like when you only have the interim tax bill generated? Do you go back and look at the last year's tax bill, the entire last year's tax bill, or how do you come up with the final calculation on these adjustments?
Well, even an interim tax bill, like let's just say the taxes were, $5,000 for the year, the previous year. So most municipalities don't get, it's usually not till around May in the following year where like May of 2024, when they figure out what the taxes are going to be for 2024 in most municipalities. So up until, between January and May, but until the final bill comes out, we're going to be doing an estimate of what the taxes will be based on the prior year. So if the prior year was $5,000, we would probably gross that up by 3% or 4% or 5%. We usually get some sort of indication from the municipality as what it might be, but it's usually, most of the time it's 3 to 5%. So let's say it's 5%. So we would have adjusted based on we expect that the taxes will be 5% higher in 2024 than they were in 2023. And we'll do the calculation by the number of days, etc. And then if the tax bill, we get the final tax bill, and it turns out it was, you know, a 4.9% increase, or it was a 5.2% increase, we can recalculate after the closing what the taxes would have been and who paid their fair share, or did they pay their fair share? Because one of the closing documents that's always exchanged between a buyer and a seller on closing is an undertaking to readjust anything that's on the statement of adjustments. Okay, so you have the right after closing, once we get the final bill, to do a calculation and determine whether the seller was overpaid or was underpaid, or the buyer was overpaid or underpaid based on the taxes. The reality is, though, the dollar amount will be so small when you do those calculations that we seldom ever go back to the other side to ask for it, because we'll do the math and, oh, the seller owes $12.20, or the buyer owes $25. It's not worth doing it. It's so small most of the time, because the original estimate is usually on a number that's going to be pretty close. And then when you calculate it, if we did it based on 5%, it ended up being 4.8% or 5.2%. When you do the math and divide it by 365 days, the number is usually so small, it's just not worth adjusting. But the parties are within the rights to adjust. So if it's a bigger amount, you can adjust and insist on the proper adjustment. But most of the time, it's just impractical.
Got it. No, so it comes from a personal experience where I saw the adjustment after getting the final tax bill was coming close to $465, and that is the time, is it something like you, if you are representing the buyer, you would reach out to the seller's side, or if you for that adjustment, the difference?
Yeah, you're always entitled to do that adjustment, right? And if it's a significant amount of money, then by all means it'll be done, and you'll make demand of the seller to to pay up whatever it is. But I'm just saying, most of the time, because we're using the prior year's taxes plus a reasonable gross up number, that when you do the math after you get the final tax bill, it's such a small adjustment that it's just not worth doing.
Right. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everybody that lasted to the end. Really appreciate you being here, and we look forward to having you again. And guys, tune in. We're dropping a brand new episode on the David on Real Estate podcast tomorrow, every Friday. And then I hope to see everybody on our Coffee with Sabiha on Monday. Espresso with Gio every Wednesday, and we have a barbecue coming up, which we're really looking forward to. I'm getting a lot of emails, a lot of texts about the barbecue. It's always such great events here at the office, and I think the upcoming barbecue is on the 17th of July. So I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody there. Thank you, David Korman.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.